Don't smile at the morose man. He had a sullen disposition, so I thought I could brighten his day with a smile. That was a terrible idea. He certainly wasn't the only gloomy character I'd ever spotted on the early evening train. For many of us, it's a very long journey home from the city. We wear crestfallen expressions, decompressing after another soul-crushing day at work. Nevertheless, this particular man caught my attention. He was standing on the opposite side of the carriage, firmly fixated on the doors behind me. His vacant brown eyes hardly seemed to register what they were seeing. He had a pale complexion, and his skin sagged, as if it were too loose for the bald head on which it hung. Most importantly, he was sulking. I smiled. If only I could retract that smile. Anyway, I beamed brightly, striving to cheer the man up. It took a long time for the sour-faced gentleman to notice the upbeat teenage girl who was facing towards him. Well, it probably only took a couple of seconds, but that certainly feels like a long time to maintain an unreciprocated smile. Eventually, thankfully, the man began to turn. His expression did not change. His body did not move. His head simply rotated enough to ensure that his eyes were firmly locked onto mine. I waited for his frown to turn upside down. It didn't. Slowly, sinisterly, the man shook his head. It was only a slight movement, but that made it all the more intimidating. He shook his head as if to say, "You shouldn't be doing that." My glowing grin immediately dissipated, of course. I cast my eyes to the ground, feeling humiliated. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, ignoring the burning sensation that scorched my cheeks. How many more stops, I wondered. The most perturbing thing about the entire situation was that the man did not stop looking at me. Despite my averted gaze, I could still feel those beady little eyes boring into my skull. I could see him in my peripheral vision. He did not move. He just stared sullenly. I did what I always do in uncomfortable situations. I went on Reddit. I switched to my throwaway account and asked for advice on dealing with odd people. I fully explained my predicament. Most people just called him a creep. They said to move down the carriage. One user popped up on my private chat. I won't include his username, but he had something more unsettling to tell me. Why would you smile at the morose man? I thought he was screwing with me. I asked why he was calling this stranger the morose man. From your description, I realized who you'd seen. I played along with the prankster, asking about the morose man, who I assumed to be some sort of urban legend. He minds his own business, unless somebody disturbs his peace, and you just disturbed him. You need to get off that train and run. His wrath eventually subsides, and he goes on his way. He will pursue you until midnight. My chest started to tighten. I was no believer in ghost stories, but I felt something that I still can't explain. I knew that the Reddit user was telling the truth. I felt it. I could feel it in the man's awful eyes, which was still watching me. I asked the mystery messenger what the man was going to do. He wasn't doing anything particularly threatening. He was standing still. Why does that matter? Just stay away from him. What time is it in your part of the world? 6:59 p.m. Right, 5 hours. Just stay away from him, and make sure that you avoid doorways. I thought that final sentence was a little peculiar, but it was definitely no more peculiar than the user's claim that the dismal gentleman was some sort of unearthly being. That being said, I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut. I don't scare easily. This stranger, however, terrified me. We were frozen in that state for another 20 minutes or so. When the train eventually reached the next station, I slinked out of the open doors. I still hadn't looked up from my phone. I didn't want to see the man's ghoulish face. I just wanted to get home. Once I was on the platform, I stopped walking backwards. I stood and waited, trying my best to watch the man out of the corner of my vision. He didn't move. He stayed on the train. The doors closed. I cried exuberantly as the train pulled away. What a fool you've made of yourself, Paige, I thought. You let anxiety get the better of you, and now you're at the wrong station. Fantastic. Perhaps the foreboding feeling in my body had simply dissipated because I was no longer in the vicinity of that haunting man. Perhaps it was simply that his gaze was no longer upon me. Whatever the case, I felt normal again. I felt stupid, and I began to stroll out of the station. I was bursting for the toilet. I hate public bathrooms, but I knew I still had a long journey ahead of me, so I decided to face my phobia. I strolled into the empty bathroom, which was illuminated by a cold, clinical, fluorescent light. Choosing the first cubicle, I entered, sat down, and opened the Uber app. I was still about 40 minutes from home if I were to travel by car, and most of the nearby Ubers were not really nearby at all. After 10 minutes of faffing, I booked one and groaned at the text box which explained there would be a 30-minute wait time. 8 p.m., home by 8:40 p.m. Great. Dinner, then bed. The main bathroom door suddenly opened. I ignored it, continuing to scroll through my phone. Shoes clumped across the tiled floor. They were very heavy, slow, purposeful. The footsteps stopped. I looked down and saw 2 black smart shoes poking beneath the bottom of my cubicle door. There are 2 other cubicles, I pointed out. Knock. Just one knock. That was all. I looked a little more closely at the black footwear and realized, much to my terror, that I was looking at men's shoes. "Excuse me," I timidly whispered. Are you in the right bathroom?" Knock. "Just fuck off," I screamed. I hoped somebody would come. Somebody had to come. An awful feeling overcame me. Without fully accepting why I was doing it, I frantically opened my phone and messaged the Reddit user. "I don't think you need me to tell you who's on the other side of that door." I asked my anonymous savior what I should do. "Don't open the door. I told you to stay away from doorways. Just wait for somebody else to come into the bathroom. Remember, the Morose Man doesn't like to be disturbed. If somebody enters, he should leave." So I waited and waited. I waited until the Uber came and left. Then something dawned on me. I could wait in the cubicle until morning, surely. No such luck, according to my online guru. Closer to midnight, his patience wears thin. For now, he's polite. Soon, he won't be polite. You should pray that somebody enters and interrupts him. I looked at the time on my phone, 8:37 p.m. Then I looked at the bottom of the cubicle door. The knocking had ceased, but the shoes remained. I leaned to one side of the toilet seat, peering through the crack between the door and the cubicle wall, hoping to catch a glimpse of the figure on the other side. Perhaps I wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't, in fact, the Morose Man. I couldn't see him. He was standing too far to the side. And then a face slid into view, peering through the gap between the cubicle door and wall, revealing the insidious thing on the other side. Its brown eye was now black. I screamed in panic, instantly jerking myself back to the center of the toilet seat, not daring to move. I wanted to keep messaging my mystery Reddit friend, but he also gave me the creeps. Why did he know so much about the Morose Man anyway? I searched for information about the malicious entity on the internet. To calm myself, I decided to accept my position of powerlessness and simply scroll through social media. I wanted something grounded, something based in reality. I know, I never thought I'd say such a thing about social networks. Wait, the police, I thought. I dialed 999. It rang. I was asked which emergency service I wanted to reach. I opened my mouth to answer, but then, knock, 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 knock. A series of frantic, enraged thuds rattled the cubicle door back and forth. My mouth was open, but no sound escaped my lips. I was petrified. A shushing sound quietly hissed from the other side of the door. I hung up the phone. I suppose it was not a good idea to disturb the morose man. I paused. What other options did I have? I had the idea to ask the Reddit messenger to call the police on my behalf, but the morose man shushed me more aggressively, as if he were reading my thoughts. I thought of screaming for help, and he unleashed a croaking wail that sounded like a feral beast caught in a bear trap. Stop trying to think of solutions. Don't disturb him. I waited. 9:27 p.m. 2 hours of frozen terror in a train station bathroom. I was running out of time. Trains kept arriving, but nobody was coming into the bathroom, and there wouldn't be many more trains before midnight. That meant there wouldn't be many more potential bathroom goers. With every passing moment, I replayed the Reddit user's message in my head. Soon he won't be polite. 10:31 p.m. The knocking resumed. The overhead lights started to dim as if the morose man were gradually extinguishing it. I shuddered ceaselessly, lifting my knees up to my chin and wrapping my arms around them. 11:41 p.m. After 4 hours in the bathroom, I heard a train, possibly the last train of the evening, pull into the station. The bathroom door finally opened. 2 chattering, inebriated women entered the room. I saw the black shoes of the morose man hurriedly scuttle to the cubicle beside me, and he closed the door behind him. I hate having to touch gross toilet door handles after washing my hands, one of the girls said. I'm gonna wedge this door open with my shoe. Chantal, I don't want to fucking talk about bathroom doors. You're such a bitch, one of the girls said. Did you just see that man, Tara? Chantal asked. Don't change the subject, Tara spat. You know that guy in the club saw me first, and... Tara stopped mid-sentence, as she saw me hurtle from my cubicle like a deranged animal, slipping on the tiled floor. I sprinted for the exit. You alright, love? Tara drunkenly slurred. Please, I begged, move out of the way. I need to get out of here. Hey, I told you there was a creepy man in here, Chantal said, marching past me. He's been harassing this poor girl, I bet. Hey, mate. My heart sank as I turned to see Chantal strutting towards the cubicle door next to the one I just exited. She pounded furiously on the middle cubicle door. Don't do that, I pleaded. Remember, the morose man doesn't like to be disturbed. We've got you, babe, Tara promised, patting my back. Chantal roared like a lioness and booted the cubicle door inwards with the one high-heeled shoe that she was still wearing. The door practically flew off its hinges, ricocheting off the cubicle wall. I held my breath, waiting for the man to charge at her. What the fuck? Chantal gasped. He's not in here. Tara snorted with laughter. You dumb bitch, you probably imagined him. Torrential sweat oozed from my goosebump-riddled flesh. The man had strolled into the cubicle beside me. I heard him. Where did he go? This wasn't right. This was all horribly wrong. I started to back towards the exit, bumping into Tara, who was still blocking the doorway. Chantal frowned. No, I'm telling you, Tara. The girl trailed off, looking in my direction. Her complexion turned paler than that of the morose man. Her eyes widened, her jaw slacked, and her arms fell stiffly to her sides. She unleashed a primal scream of horror. Consumed by unimaginable fear, I realized that I hadn't bumped into Tara. I took a few tentative steps forwards, before slowly turning on my heel. The bathroom exit led onto a pitch-black train station. The lights were gone. The people were gone. All I could see was the morose man and the unholy act that he was committing. Tara's body was slowly being ingested into the gaping mouth of the black-eyed man. He had grown a foot taller, and his looming figure filled most of the doorway. His morose mouth had widened to squeeze Tara's still wriggling body inside. He used the now abnormally long fingers on his gnarled, ghoulish hands to hold the girl's ankles. He was forcing her, head first, into his nightmarish gullet. I chose flight. Chantel chose fight. I started to back towards the cubicles, but the manic girl beside me ran towards the exit, screeching at the entity and begging it to release her friend. The man was still greedily swallowing Tara's spasming, half-alive body, but he unwrapped the fingers on his left hand from her ankle and seized Chantel by the neck. As I continued to back towards the farthest cubicle, I watched the morose man complete one course and prepare for the next. Chantel was certainly much louder than Tara. She unleashed a series of short, pained yelps, her cries muffled by the inside of the creature's body as he slid her down his throat. I threw open the cubicle door, locked it behind me, and immediately looked at my phone. 11:43 p.m. That traumatizing scene of unfathomable gore took place in the space of 2 fucking minutes. How? Shoes clomped against the tiles. I found myself where I'd started. I was trapped in the bathroom stall, staring at the shoes which poked through the bottom of the door. The morose man had grown so large that he could poke his head over the top of the cubicle door. The horrifying apparition, which still wore that dejected expression, shook its head at me. His morbid frown lifted into a sickening smile for a split second. Then it quickly returned to a state of moroseness. The man shook his head at me, much as he had on the train. He was reminding me of what I'd done wrong. I flipped the toilet lid down, clambered onto it, and squished my body against the back wall, trying to escape the wretched thing before me. The morose man was not finished. Midnight was fast approaching, and his patience was wearing out. The elongated fingers on his 2 hands suddenly appeared, grasping the top of the cubicle door. He violently wobbled it in its hinges. I started to blubber, looking down at the phone in my hand. 11:45 p.m. Every minute felt like an eternity. I wouldn't make it to midnight, I was sure of that. The man reached an arm over the top of the cubicle door, stretching his hellish fingers towards the lock. It fumbled clumsily, trying to slide the door open. I'm not going to stand here and wait to die. I turned to my right and started to pull myself over the wall of the cubicle beside me. At the moment I landed on the side, I heard the lock slide across. The monster barreled into the cubicle I'd just exited. I knew I only had moments to spare, so I fled the middle cubicle and ran towards the bathroom exit. Welcoming the dark embrace of the train station, I didn't pause to look over my shoulder. I already knew that the morose man would be following me. He could find me anywhere. That was when I remembered what the Reddit user had repeatedly said. I told you to stay away from doorways. I know, I was an idiot. Well, I hadn't believed in the morose man. Not really. You can't blame me for going into the bathroom. I'd already put the fright of the train out of my head. I viewed it as a moment of anxiety. As I ran across the train platform, however, I could no longer deny it. I looked over my shoulder. The man was striding across the platform. Slowly and surely, he was striding towards me. But he was slow, and he wouldn't catch me. As long as I stay away from doorways, I can escape. I kept running. I ran until I reached the end of the platform. I realized I'd foolishly forgotten how to exit the train station. Fuck that, I thought. I don't want to go near doorways. Throwing caution to the wind, with my life hanging in the balance, I jumped down from the platform onto the railway line. I followed the tree-lined train tracks, stealing a glance at my phone. 11:51 p.m. I glanced behind me. The morose man was in pursuit, but he seemed even taller now, taller than any human, and he seemed faster, much faster. I had to get out of the open. I was too exposed. I darted to my right, entering the forest, and lit the way with my phone. No doors in the forest, and the trees were tightly grouped together, so the gargantuan man would have to shrink back to human size if he were to follow. It seemed like my best option. I weaved between trees, casting my torchlight before me, so as not to bump into anything. I didn't want to end up flat on my face. I didn't want to be the morose man's dessert. I heard that unearthly wail once more. It was terrifying enough to startle all of the peaceful creatures in the forest. Birds flew from trees and grounded animals rustled in bushes, fleeing the scene. I switched my phone off. No more light. I didn't really think it would make a difference. I had a feeling the man could still find me, even without a light, even without a doorway. Just a few minutes, Paige. You just need to last a few minutes, I convinced myself. Except for the sound of my shoes crunching against leaves, the forest was completely silent. I could scarcely see the outlines of trees in the darkness. The canopy of leaves above me prevented any moonlight from illuminating my surroundings. I heard the booming snap of what sounded like a thick tree branch. The man was close, very close. I wanted so desperately to check the time on my phone, but I tried to rely on my body clock. Every second felt like an hour, but I grounded myself. It must be at least 11:55 p.m., I thought. I crept forwards, failing at stealthily traversing the forest. Every step seemed to make noisy contact with leaves and twigs. I tried to quicken the pace. There was no use in concealing my location. He knew where to find me. I suddenly heard low breathing from a few yards behind me. Not daring to turn around, I screamed at the top of my lungs and sprinted ahead, roughly scraping my shoulder against the jagged bark of a tree. I grimaced, but adrenaline pushed me onwards. I fumbled for the phone in my pocket and used it as my flashlight once more. I also needed to know the time. I couldn't resist any longer. 11:59 p.m., of course. I continued to swerve between trees, praying that I wouldn't trip, praying that I wouldn't bump into another tree. One more obstacle could be the death of me. Midnight. I couldn't believe it. I yelled victoriously, twisting around. My flashlight shone on the horrifying spectre before me. The morose man was now the height of the trees around him, slinking his skeletal body between them, pursuing me. My heart thumped. Maybe the Reddit user lied. Maybe the morose man never stops. I closed my eyes and braced myself for death. I braced, succumbing to a feeling of pure horror. I felt a brittle limb brush against my clothes. I opened my eyes to the man walking past me, brushing one of his spindly legs against my coat. I turned around, casting my light onto him, and I watched as the spider-like 10-foot-tall man vanished into the depths of the forest. If you ever see a morose gentleman, don't disturb him. Do not smile at him.
"It's raining, Jessie. Come inside," I called. It wasn't the first time I'd caught my Irish setter eagerly scooping up grass and dirt with her paws, but it was certainly the first time she'd succeeded in uncovering something horrifying. "What the?" I said. I locked eyes with Jessie's discovery in the ditch. A woman's corpse. My heart cascaded towards the earth, pulling my limp body in tow. And as darkness enveloped my vision, I prayed that it had all been a direful dream. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying in the wet grass, eyeing both the setting sun and Jessie's slobbery tongue above me. "I'm awake," I groaned, sitting up and stroking her. "I just took a quick nap. Why am I—" Then it all came back to me, and even in that darkening garden, I could see what lay in the hole. Me. I felt my chest twist and tighten as I expended all of my energy in an effort to retain consciousness. There was absolutely no denying it. The lifeless body in Jessie's ditch was an identical copy of my own. From the brunette hair to every freckle on her newly rotting face, everything but the horizontal scar on her forehead. I ran inside whilst Jessie continued to flit between me and the dead woman who looked like me. My dog whimpered in confusion, and I joined her. But with trembling hands I managed to pick up my phone from the kitchen counter to ring my husband. "Hi, honey," he said. "It's a bit late to be ringing me, isn't it?" "Jack, you need to come home," I shuddered. "What's wrong, Sophia?" he asked. "I'll be home tomorrow." "Please ask your boss to let you come home early," I whispered, refusing to peel my eyes from the patio doors overlooking Jessie's ditch. "What's going on?" Jack asked a little more urgently. Jessie found something in the garden that I can't explain it over the phone," I cried. I was met with silence, a pause that filled me with inexplicable dread. It must have lasted no more than 2 seconds, but it was enough to raise every hair on my flesh. And then, "You sound really worked up, darling," Jack said. "I'll ask Stuart to let me drive back early." That slowed the immediate alarm bells, but it did not still them. I let Jessie inside and the two of us curled up on the sofa, lights on and patio curtains drawn, though that did nothing to resolve the existential anxiety, as I knew what lay beyond them. 2 hours later Jack returned from his business trip, and Jessie bounded into the hallway to greet him. "Where's your mummy?" he cooed. "Is she okay?" When my husband entered the lounge, he beamed brightly at me, a soothing smile that would usually put me at ease. "What did our crazy dog find?" he asked. "I think I need to show you, not tell you," I said. I drew the curtains and opened the patio doors onto our pitch-black garden. It must have been around 10 p.m. The world felt unnervingly still. The only sounds were my squelching footsteps in the grass and Jessie's nervous panting. I pulled my phone from my pocket and shone the flashlight into the ditch. But what I saw filled me with as much terror as the initial discovery. "What am I supposed to see?" Jack asked, sighing. The ditch was empty. "No, it was right here," I whispered breathlessly. "I passed out when I saw it." Jack nodded. "Well, that probably explains it. You got confused and fainted. You're prone to doing that." "Yes, but I don't hallucinate things. And the body was still there after I regained consciousness," I huffed. Jack smiled and stroked my face. "You always misremember things. Why don't you head up to bed? I'll pick up a McDonald's for us. I need some food, and you could do with a coffee." I begrudgingly agreed, watching from the bedroom window as Jack hopped in the car and went on a late-night McDonald's trip. But I didn't go to bed. Not after the house's external lights revealed something terrifyingly damning on the bumper of his BMW. Dirt. My heart was pounding as I pieced together what I could. That Jack had clearly slipped into the garden and moved the body to his car before coming inside. Why? Well, I had an inkling as to how I could find the answers about the man I thought I had known for 7 years. With Jessie closely following me, still rattled about her discovery in the garden, I headed to Jack's office. It wasn't a room that he had ever forbidden me from entering. However, one of his desk drawers had a lock, which had always been a point of contention in our relationship. Something that Jack forever dismissed as a security measure against intruders. I didn't know how much time I had before he returned home, so I got to work. I strode through Jack's cluttered workspace, rounding the corner of the desk. Without hesitation, I proceeded to hammer away at the lock drawer with the blunt end of a heavy ornament. Jessie pawed at the drawer inquisitively, barking at the excessive noise. "That's it, girl," I grunted, hammering away. "Let's make it look like an accident. You were all worked up after all." After repeatedly bludgeoning the drawer lock, the handle eventually snapped off the wood, and the drawer slid open. Inside there was nothing but a small piece of paper, and on it were passwords. Not what I'd expected to find, and I knew I had limited time before Jack returned, but there was no way I could waste the opportunity. Everything that I'd known about my husband was a lie. I threw caution to the wind, turning on the monitor and sitting in his desk chair. The password worked. As the desktop loaded, I wondered what I would find in the mysterious folder I had seen marked on the sheet. What sordid secret was my husband keeping? I didn't want to imagine why there would be another me in a shallow grave. Cloning? Time travel? My head was spinning. I searched for the mysterious folder, and there was one result. A password-protected folder. And so I shakily entered the key. Inside the folder I found neither evidence of some master cloning program, nor evidence that my husband had travelled to the future and murdered me. Yes, I'm aware that my hypotheses were ludicrous, but the truth is far less believable. What did I find? Just one Word document with an obscure title. The Seed Process. I opened it to find diagrams and instructions for some sort of ritual. I violently trembled at the crudely drawn diagrams, depictions of humans being lobotomized, brains in jars, roots sprouting from the pink matter. I skim-read the list of instructions, and the picture of this seemingly supernatural ritual started to form. Remove the brain, plant the seed, bury the body, water the brain, and watch limbs grow. Let a new improved human flourish. Mould your loved ones in your desired image. No more resistance. I started to wail uncontrollably, and Jessie nuzzled my leg to soothe me. I could type more of what I read in that document, but recounting it in greater detail would only make me relive that sickening feeling, a horror that cannot be put into words. Jack has been removing my brain, burying my corpse, and regrowing me using a seed, whatever that means. I don't know how many times he's done it. I don't know how many versions of me are buried in the garden, but it explains so much. The blank spots in my memory, the misremembering Jack always mentions, the fact that every time I notice a red flag for my husband, I wake feeling different, refreshed, compliant. Every time he's been chipping a piece of me away, changing me, improving me, killing me. That night before he came back to the house, I took Jessie and left without a word. Is he tracking me? I hope not. Whoever me might be. A far stretch from Sophia, that much is certain. And it fills me with a deep sorrow. It also explains the unsalvageable chasm within me. Some repressed, unreachable past version of myself lies at the bottom of that well, I imagine. After all, Jack killed the real Sophia long ago. Who knows how deeply into the garden she's buried.
In 8 days, I will wake up in 1999 and relive the past 23 years. I'm trapped in a perpetual Groundhog Day, but it's more than a day. The world feels a little grislier with every reset. I've always known that some sort of higher power must be the architect of my eternal torture. What other explanation could there be? But I no longer simply know of that power. I've seen it. Let me rewind. I'm used to doing that after all. I don't know how many times I've relived the past 2 decades. Enough times to slowly go insane. I've done some crazy shit in a manic attempt to break free. I actually thought I could end the cycle by altering the course of the future. During the present iteration, I haven't really bothered. I'm tired. So, you're experiencing the natural course of events, I suppose. Let's just say there was an iteration in which I invested wisely, became a billionaire, and spent my riches on changing the landscape of the world. I even paid extraordinary amounts of money to scientists who promised they could uncover the secrets of the universe. I thought they could fix whatever had happened to me. The problem is that I don't think they ever truly believed my story.
They didn't really try to understand how a time loop would work, so their research was half-hearted. Nobody has ever been able to save me. And, before anybody asks, death is not the answer. It just resets the loop. I find myself waking up on the morning of December 31st, 1999. I celebrate the commencement of a new millennium with my family, and we admire the fireworks. At this point, of course, I've probably lived for a millennium. The horror of waking up in my 13-year-old body with a 36-year-old mind never fades. Or maybe I'm 3,600 years old, eh? Who knows? I'm certainly not counting. Anyway, I always detest reliving those teenage years. I pretend to be a normal kid and blend in with my peers. A few months after the first reset, I managed to calm myself down and seize the opportunity to make better decisions. Maybe it's a second chance, I decided. I took care of my health. I married the same girl, but I was a better husband and managed to prevent the divorce. I spent more time with our kids. I was a better version of myself. As December 31st of 2022 approached for the second time, I thought I'd done what the universe wanted me to do. You can imagine my unbridled terror when the loop reset. And that's when the penny dropped. I'm stuck. Madness ensued. 4 resets later, I tried killing myself. That didn't work. I tried hundreds of times in hundreds of ways. No luck. So, I've given up and resigned myself to this hellish existence. During every fresh iteration, however, I do try something new. I have to attempt to save myself, right? This time I've posted about my experience on Reddit. That's new. I'm reaching out for help. Maybe I haven't fully given up. I might say otherwise, but my actions speak louder than my words. I mean, I have to be honest. I've never gone completely wild. I've never completely ruined my life. I've stripped naked and run through the local park, but I've never, say, robbed a bank. I can't risk doing something life-destroying. What if the loop has ended? Every time I reach December of this year, I start to wonder that. It's what keeps me from entirely unhinging and doing something foolish. I don't want to endure this infinite torture. I guess I still believe that I can break free of the cycle. I believe in January 1st, 2023. I'm sure all of you will see it. Surely when that day arrives, I'll have discovered a way to move beyond the loop. Eventually, I have to make it to next year, right? What's the alternative? I can't seem to die after all. Well, that's what I used to believe. After a certain number of resets, I began to notice something disquieting. It started during one particular December of 2022. I noticed something watching me. It always happens during this final month. For instance, I might stroll down the road and catch glimpses of something in my peripheral vision. On street corners, I've seen a man with eyes that have no pupils. That's not all. I've heard things that other people say they can't hear. There are shushing noises with no source. I wake up in the night bathing in a pool of sweat, assured that I've spotted glassy pinpricks in the darkness. Sometimes they rapidly vanish, as if the thing has closed its eyelids to avoid detection. Other times, the eyes linger, hovering in front of me. The thing seems to be getting bolder, and that haunts me. Last week, I was in an art gallery, and I saw a terrifying painting. My wife and friends said it was beautiful. They couldn't comprehend why I suddenly had a gaunt complexion. I suppose it would seem like an odd reaction. After all, the painting simply depicted an ordinary man. But I felt as if I'd taken a stroll through the uncanny valley. His eyes were dreadful. Something about him was marginally off. And for the briefest moment, the gallery light caught the painted eyes in such a way that the pupils disappeared. I found myself staring into the vacant eyes from various street corners of my darkened bedroom. They were boring into my skull. I whimpered in terror. The worst part is that I've been to the art exhibit before. On December 10th, 2022, my wife and friends always drag me there. That painting wasn't there in any of the previous iterations of this loop. In that exact spot, there had been a painting of Big Ben, proudly displaying 11 o'clock. And that's something which petrifies me. It means things are changing, and I don't think they're changing for the better. I have considered letting go. My fight is fading. Perhaps I should embrace the entity with open arms. Perhaps it has come to release me from this nightmare. It could offer a finite death and put an end to the loop. But what if it delivers a worse fate? Every time I see the glassy-eyed man, I feel my chest coil into a clove hitch. He isn't good. He isn't trying to save me. I need to figure out how to reach January 1st, 2023. In 6 days, I will wake up in 1999 and relive the past 23 years. I've posted the first part of this story twice, but I know what you're thinking. Why repost the exact same words? In part 1, you said you were trying something new. You said it was the first time you told your story on Reddit. Liar. I needed to do things exactly the same way. I'll explain that. For brevity, I devised a clearer reference system for each new iteration of this time loop. Obviously, there were thousands of iterations before these 3. I1 refers to the first iteration. I initially posted it on Reddit. I2 refers to the second iteration. Mistakes were made. I3 refers to the third iteration, my current iteration. Something happened during I1. I barely made it out of that iteration alive. Details will follow. But that's how I discovered I was on the right track. The glassy-eyed man is pursuing me more aggressively than ever. I think he has grown weary of lurking. This is what happened during I1 on December the 24th, 2022. Merry Christmas. The man on my doorstep was a frosty fellow, so I thought of him as a sombre snowman. He had not come to offer glad tidings or a tuneful carol. I knew that before he even opened his mouth. I quaked in horror, dreading what he might have to say. "Who are you?" I timidly queried. "Somebody who can help," he responded. "I saw your post." My breathing flattened. I rooted myself to the ground, too shaken by the menacing statement to muster any kind of reply. "Who is it, Jake?" my wife called. "The postman," I shouted. No matter how many lifetimes I live, I despise lying to Vanessa. But the truth is too complicated. There has only been one time that I ever explained my looping predicament to her. She didn't believe me. She thought I was mentally unwell. Since that iteration, I have always kept it a secret from her. "How did you find my address?" I eventually whispered. "Does that really matter?" he replied. "I had to see you. I travelled a long way. I think I can stop what's happening to you." "Not here," I blurted. "My family's inside." "Time is not on your side," he firmly told me. "I'm trapped in an endless loop, so I'd beg to differ," I facetiously quipped. "It's not endless," the stranger coldly replied. "You feel the thing with no eyes getting closer, don't you?" Before I could pry my trembling lips apart, Vanessa appeared behind me. "Hello," she exuberantly said. The man weakly smiled. "Merry Christmas. I was just telling your husband that I must have foolishly left some of his parcels at the office in town." "Right," I added. "In fact, I think I should come down to the delivery office." "What have I told you about ordering presents late, Jake?" Vanessa mumbled, rolling her eyes. "I know," I smiled. "Don't worry, I'll be quick." Away from Vanessa's prying ears, we decided to meet at the town hall, which was only around the corner. Still, the drive to our rendezvous point was unsettling. I followed the man's black sedan in my beaten-up family car. No matter which radio station I chose, however, I was horrified to find that the same song played. Stairway to Heaven. The once beautiful guitar passage now seemed to harbour a sinister secret. I turned off the radio, but silence didn't make the journey any easier. The disused roads of the festive season felt haunted. Trundling behind the mystery man's sedan, I stole glances at icy alleyways on either side of the road. Shivering, I kept expecting to see him. I was too petrified to breathe, fearing that the glassy-eyed man might find me if I were to gasp for even the smallest pocket of air. We parked on a quiet residential street and went for a stroll. The sun was descending on the nearby town hall, and the streets were starting to empty, but I was a little relieved to see at least some signs of life. Regardless, I knew that wouldn't keep the dark creature from me. "What makes time so special?" the man suddenly asked. I shrugged. "We all have it," the stranger answered. "Please, just tell me what—" I was interrupted by the jarring sound of nearby lampposts shattering. The night embraced us like a thin blanket. Shushing filled the air like a ghoulishly glacial wisp of wind. I have never been consumed by such existential terror, and this is coming from a man who has been alive for countless millennia. I've even welcomed death with open arms, but that moment, above all others, truly haunted me. There are things worse than death, after all. Glassy spheres emerged from the blackness, hovering at the other end of the pavement. As hauntingly garish eyeballs illuminated the void which engulfed it, a black shape moved towards us. "Find me after you reset," the internet stranger whispered. "Time is dwindling, but—" The man did not have the opportunity to finish his sentence. His face lost its colour. Those glassy pinpricks were suddenly occupying the stranger's eye sockets. My mystery visitor howled in agony, and his flesh started to incinerate. There was no fire, but you wouldn't know that from the sight and smell of the man's disintegrating flesh. Blackened, bloody strips of skin peeled from his skeleton. His wail was that of a dying animal, desperately crying for a saviour that it prayed would emerge from the darkness. Nothing came to save the man. Collapsing to his knees, his clothes shrivelling atop his melting flesh, the stranger's cries mutated into hoarse whispers. I saw his tongue wither in his open mouth. I think he tried to say something with his final breath, but all he could achieve was the most horrific moan. He was reduced to the blood-red meat beneath his skin. I suppose there were still gauntly eyes lodged in his skull. They weren't his eyes, though. Bereft of life, the man toppled to the ground. From his burnt corpse, a spectre ascended. Those soulless pinpricks materialized in the shadowy darkness, gazing into my soul. The glassy-eyed man did not speak. I, on the other hand, could not speak. Suddenly, there was pain. Unconceivable pain. I tentatively peered down to see a black limb, flesh composed of night itself, piercing my left shoulder. Terrified beyond comprehension, I tried to bellow in pain, but my fragile body could scarcely manage a whimper. When I woke, I was in my 13-year-old body. Of course, death would have been too easy. The man was right. Time. We all have it. Some of us have all of it. Before I could fully process my surroundings, I realized that my body was in agony. Blood was soaking into the bedding from the wound on my left shoulder. My wound was still there. Immortality was no longer a foregone conclusion. The glassy-eyed man could end me. Following a hospital visit with my bewildered and traumatized parents, I resolved to change. I would no longer accept this existence. I might not survive my next encounter with the glassy-eyed man, and who knows where he might send me if he were to kill me. After all, there might be an eternal torture worse than my current one. I couldn't rid my mind of that petrifying thought. I spent years searching for the stranger who had knocked on my door. Unable to wait for the formation of the No Sleep subreddit in 2010, I decided to simply create it. I posted my experience on there. Nobody came to my house. In desperation, I posted on so many different websites, but I quickly realized my mistake. Surely I needed to repeat events in exactly the same way. I needed to submit the post on December 23rd, 2022. I did just that, but there was no house visit. Perhaps I had already made too many changes to the timeline. Fortunately, I also avoided the glassy-eyed man, but I found myself resetting to I3 on New Year's Eve 2022. I spent another 23 years waiting impatiently. Then, 2 days ago, I submitted the first part of the Reddit post. I worried that I might have worded it too differently to catch the eye of the internet stranger, but it worked. Today, he visited me. I ushered him into the living room and prayed that my wife wouldn't overhear us. I hurried the stranger through his persistent riddling. I wasn't going to let the glassy-eyed man consume him. What's the significance of New Year's Eve 1999, I asked. Do I need to go back and fix things? The stranger shook his head, and he offered, surprisingly, a succinct explanation. A time loop is a glitch in the universe, the man said. The entity is here to end the glitch that caused the loop, and he believes that the glitch is you. Something else is trapping you. Think, Jake, what happened in 1999? And that's when I remembered. My body tensed and my heart filled with dread. Some boys were bullying a kid from our neighbourhood, Pippa, a 10-year-old girl who never did anything to hurt anybody. The boys locked her in the old Hawthorne house, a derelict hellhole. I stood there telling myself I wasn't complicit in the crime. I just watched. Inaction is action, I suppose. Whilst the fireworks distracted everybody at midnight, I slipped back into the house to rescue her, but she wasn't there. I assumed she had escaped and gone home. Over the following week, however, missing posters popped up. Pippa was never found. Even more horrifyingly, neither were the other 3 boys who locked her in there. All 4 children vanished before the start of the new millennium. I told the stranger this story, and he nodded. There are things in this world that defy reason. I've seen them. That's why I came to you. Pippa needs help, he said. I think she and those boys are still in that house. I don't think the Hawthorne place abides by the rules of time. What do you mean? I asked, shuddering. The stranger paused. Based on things I've experienced, I'd say it's an 11 shrine, an unholy place that ensnares people at the turn of every new year. Such places exist outside of space and time. Pippa is the force that keeps resetting your timeline, he continued. If you free her and the boys, you might be saved. They would be returned to the moment of their disappearance in 1999. But that would be the original timeline, a parallel universe. When I returned to the house, I couldn't find the girl, I said. Why would it be any different if I were to revisit it? I told you, the stranger said. An 11 shrine exists beyond the construct of space and time, but it creates a bridge to our world between 11 p.m. and midnight on New Year's Eve. How did you learn these things? I asked, suspiciously, though I was admittedly a little late. I don't think you're ready for that tale, he said. And even if I were to tell you what happened to me, could I not still lie? You just have to trust me, Jake. All right, I conceded. How do I need to prepare for New Year's Eve? When the man explained that I'd have to venture into the Hawthorne house at 11 p.m, I trembled in horror. I've spent Christmas Eve watching my family with teary eyes. Can I avoid the flesh-searing limbs of the glassy-eyed man for 6 days? I keep seeing those lifeless eyeballs in the darkest crevices of my house. Even now, as I write, I could swear I just heard shushing from our wardrobe. Tonight, I will wake up in 1999 and relive the past 23 years. Have you ever squandered an opportunity to prevent something terrible from happening to somebody? Maybe you've been caught in a time loop too. I suppose you might not yet know. You could reset tomorrow. It could happen on New Year's Eve 2034. Who knows? Over the festive period, I couldn't stop thinking about New Year's Eve 1999. I remembered being terrified of those bullies, just like the little girl. If I had been courageous enough to intervene, I wouldn't have faced the karmic retribution of a time loop. I am still in I3, and, since my previous post, I was sure to make note of the internet stranger's contact details, lest the glassy-eyed man should, once again, reduce my new friend to a smouldering carcass. "What's your name?" I asked. "Harold Langley," the man answered. Harold still wouldn't tell me how he knew about such corrupted things as 11 shrines and spiritual forces. He told me that I already had everything I needed. I knew to go back to the Hawthorne house between 11 PM and midnight on New Year's Eve. Any New Year's Eve would do, in fact. Well, I could simply wait to be reset to 1999. Then I could stop the boys from ever locking Pippa in the house, I suggested. Harold shook his head. Even if you were to return to the past and drag the children miles away from the Hawthorne house, the shrine would still entrap them at 11 PM on that fateful New Year's Eve, 1999. Remember, they're already there. The house exists outside of time. Much like your own loop, no matter where they might travel, their bodies would still reset to that house at 11 PM. They can only be freed from within the 11 shrine. Sending me back to 1999 is a convoluted way of sending a message, I grumbled. She doesn't know what she's doing, Jake, Harold gently assured me. Pippa is calling for help from an ungodly realm, and that has incurred an abnormality in time. After a long discussion, I could no longer escape the fact that Harold knew far more about this topic than me. I'd spent millennia searching for an answer, and I finally had one. I just couldn't accept it. In truth, I simply didn't want to go anywhere near the Hawthorne house. It imbued me with unspeakable thoughts. Every time I walked past it, I felt evilness surge through me. And I know that every child in my neighbourhood felt the same way. The Hawthorns had died decades before our time, but we knew that something was deeply wrong with the building they'd left behind. The house felt like a living, unfeeling thing. It was crooked, out of place, ill-intentioned. New Year's Eve 2022. The Hawthorne house was exactly as I remembered it, though the neighbourhood was certainly much livelier. There were no missing posters, and the roads were littered with revellers, preparing for the new year that I had spent ceaseless centuries attempting to reach. 10:41 PM. 19 minutes until I would reset, unless the glassy-eyed man finds and ends me. If Harold were correct, my only salvation would be to enter Hawthorne House. At 11 o'clock in the evening, the shrine would open. There's something much more frightening about seeing a haunted house in the real world. I've never minded eerie buildings in photographs or films, but the Hawthorne House is the most terrifying place I've ever visited. I gently walked from the moss-covered gate to the fatigued front door, which was painted a long faded blue. In the front yard there was an unlabelled stone cross, submerged in overgrown, withered grass blades. There were 3 stories to the neglected building. Dark chasms lay behind the glassy panes, and the attic had a misted-over window. I felt a piercing pang of horror in my chest at the sight of a black shape moving behind the glass. Other than a private property sign on the front gate, there was nothing to ward away intruders. There was no barricade across the rotting front door, and it was unlocked, so it creakily inched open with a light push. Perhaps the mere sight of the horrid place was enough to deter most people from trespassing. I wished that I could have the same luxury. As I entered the Hawthorne house, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and lit the dismal place with my torch, revealing a hallway that led onto a ginormous staircase. There was an open doorway on the left-hand side of the hallway, and it led onto the lounge. I strolled into the dusty, asbestos-riddled death trap. In the living area, there was a sofa which had been partially devoured by vermin, but I collapsed onto it and waited. 11 p.m. My heart stopped. I wasn't fading away. I was still in the present. No, this isn't the present, I reminded myself. The Hawthorne house exists outside of time. The whole thing still confused me. Nevertheless, my phone's lock screen displayed 2300, which was good enough for me. I wasn't resetting. That was the important thing. Before I could wrap my head around that, however, I noticed something. The walls were groaning. Chest undulating in terror, I leapt to my feet. The whining foundations of the house seemed to lament my presence. I took a look at the world outside of the mucky lounge windows. My dimly lit neighbourhood was rapidly vanishing from view. Within seconds, everything beyond the exterior of the house was black. The bridge to the physical realm was gone. Though time was a foreign concept in that shrine to evil, I still felt that it shouldn't be wasted. I had no idea what happened to the children, and I had no idea what was about to happen to me. I needed to find them. Then I could focus on finding a way to reopen the bridge and escape. I don't know how to exit an 11 shrine, Harold had quietly admitted to me. Time works differently in there. I think it only opens a bridge to our world when it wants to do so. So I suppose you have to give it something that it wants more than Pippa and those boys. Those words rung in my head. I found myself meandering in the living room of the lost house. There was a large frame above the fireplace. Using my phone light, I studied the unnerving canvas that loomed above me. It was a painting of the Hawthorne house in its bygone glory days. I did not recognise the three people standing in front of the house, but I assumed it had to be the Hawthorne family. The mother and father were prim and proper. They must have lived in the 1940s, judging by their fashion. But I wasn't really looking at them. I was looking at their boy. He was a skeletal thing. His flesh seemed to cling tightly to the outline of his skull. The indignant expression on his face was communicated through joyless eyes and thin lips. He had a complexion that was almost wholly white, and that, strangely, gave the jubilant expressions on his parents' faces a sinister undertone. Why were they so happy? Their son appeared half dead. Needless to say, the painting absolutely horrified me, but everything in that house horrified me. The swirling, nightmarish colours of the artwork felt like a fever dream. In the pristine oval window at the top of the painted house, there was movement. The paint was actually moving. Unlike the movement I'd seen in the real-life oval window, these painted shapes were crystal clear. Pippa and the three bullies. Their mouths were agape, much like the man in the scream, and they were huddling together, ferociously banging their tiny fists on the window. As if that weren't horrifying enough, there was more movement in the picture. The painted mother turned around and started strolling along the path, heading towards the house. The sun was decaying before my very eyes. His painted form seemed to be crumbling. Yet the father smiled, and the mother continued walking towards the house. She reached the front door. Thumping followed. And I do not simply mean that I saw the painted mother thump the painted door. There was a thumping sound on the real-life door, which was in the hallway behind me. A blood-curdling screech followed. It was a woman, I suppose, but her voice no longer sounded human. There was a guttural, distorted quality to it. "Don't take my child from me." I had no desire to hang around and find out what she meant. I sprinted from the living room to the hallway, praying the front door would hold. I hauled my body up the rotting stairs 2 at a time. Plunging into the darkness, I prepared for the door to fly from its hinges. The thing for which I did not prepare was to suddenly find myself standing on a well-lit, refurbished landing. The Hawthorne house had morphed into a lavish home. From the top of the staircase, I turned to face the downstairs hallway. The banging on the front door had ceased, and it opened to reveal the mother. She was an ordinary person, not a frightening apparition. I realised I had wandered through a portal in time. I would say my initial guess had been accurate. It seemed to be a snapshot of the 1940s. "Jonathan, tell Bert that dinner will be ready in half an hour," the mother shouted. "He's not in here, Sarah," Jonathan replied. The father's ghost startled me, though the couple seemed much jollier in this memory. He strolled straight through my body and walked down the stairs. "Well, I told the boy that he could only play until I finished taking down the laundry," Sarah huffed. "He was with the Dalton boys across the road," Jonathan said, now striding across the downstairs hallway. "I shall fetch him." The ghosts of the parents evaporated, and the house transported to a different moment in time. There was crying from a room farther down the landing. As I walked towards it, I noticed more frames on the walls. They were less macabre than the portrait I'd seen in the living room. There were 3 paintings of the individual Hawthorne family members. Seeing an ajar door on the left side of the landing, I peered through the slight opening. The sobbing mother was sitting at her dressing table, which faced away from the doorway. I could only see the back of her body. The father was holding her shoulders and futilely striving to console her. "I cannot live without him, Jonathan," she wailed. "A mother cannot live without her baby." "You shan't have to do that," Jonathan promised. "I have found a way to return his soul to us. Francis acquired some books. There are rituals that can help. But they come with a price, so any price," Sarah coldly interrupted. "And what of the boys who murdered our child?" Jonathan asked. "Death would be too merciful," she said. "I agree. From my readings, I've learned ways in which we could make them suffer. If we could transform this house into unhallowed ground, we could ensnare their souls and eternally trap them here. They would become part of the building's woodwork. We would have to build an 11th shrine on the eve of the new year. There might be consequences for others who step foot on this land, but it'd do it," Sarah icily whispered. The world washed away again. I saw brief flashes of the parents in their bedroom. They were drawing bloody patterns on the walls. I heard sourceless screams, cries of anguish from who I only assume must have been the children who murdered Bert. The jigsaw pieces were sliding together. The souls of Bert's killers were embedded in the Hawthorne house. Sarah and Jonathan had succeeded, but had they also managed to resurrect their child? I shuddered, remembering the ghastly painting of a withering Bert in the living room. Something told me that a happily ever after hadn't been on the cards for the fractured family. The lights extinguished. The fresh decor aged in seconds, returning the Hawthorne house to the present. Well, I suppose I wasn't really experiencing any sort of time period. Everything faded away except for one thing, one person, the mother. She was still sitting at her dressing table, facing away from the doorway. Her vanity mirror was cracked and coated in filth. I couldn't see her reflection. Her clothes were dusty and tattered. Her once beautiful blonde hair was withered, and she was stroking it with a hairbrush. Her strokes were so vicious that clumps of hair were ripping from her head. No fucking way. I'm not going in there. I attempted to cautiously back away from the door, but floorboards betrayed me. They moaned beneath my weight. Fuck. The hairbrushing abruptly stopped. The old rickety vanity stool squeaked as the mother adjusted herself. I expected her to twist her entire body around to face me, but she didn't. Instead, she simply twisted her head. She twisted beyond breaking point. She twisted her head 180 degrees. What was even ghastlier, however, was the face which gazed upon me. It was decomposing. Maggots swam through the cavities in the mother's flesh. Her lipless mouth opened, revealing rotten teeth. She did not smile as she had in the painting. "Where is my son?" the half-human voice cried. To protect itself, my haunted brain had detached from reality. So, when the bedroom door slammed shut, I was relieved and petrified in equal measure. I was relieved to be free of the most ghoulish gaze, but I was petrified of what I would face next. Remembering why I had come to the Hawthorne house, I resolved to keep searching for Pippa and the boys. I didn't know what kind of demonic spectre I'd just seen in the bedroom, and I didn't want to know. Standing in the upstairs hallway, desperately trying to catch my breath, I became aware of a squelching sound. I cast my phone torch onto the wall behind me. A black liquid of unknown composition had scrawled 3 direful words. "Father is home." Moving my torch onto the paintings, I saw Bert and Sarah in their portraits. The third painting, on the other hand, was merely a blank canvas. Jonathan had left his portrait. I heard the front door open and slam shut. Loud footsteps moved with immense speed and purpose, clunking up the stairs. Crying in utterly primal fear, I ran towards the far end of the landing. I opened the final door on the left, hearing floorboards groan beneath the weight of some hulking, monstrous entity. For a split second, before I stepped through the open doorway, I caught a glimpse of something in the glow of my phone light. The father was far taller and wider than he had appeared in the flashbacks. His gargantuan, ghostly form could barely squeeze through the upstairs corridor. His decomposing face was much like that of his wife, but his eyes were bloody spheres in his sockets. I slammed the door behind me and locked it. There was a cacophony of fist-pounding on the door. The father said nothing. His fury spoke far louder than words. I found myself in a second bedroom, Bert's bedroom. Heart still not slowing, the frights did not cease. "Jake," a disembodied girl's voice hissed. I froze. "It's Pippa," she continued. "We're in the hideaway. We've been here for months." "Where's the hideaway?" I asked. The banging on the bedroom door finally quietened. Pippa whispered again. "Behind the wardrobe," she said. "Hurry, I think they heard me." I found the wardrobe on the left-hand wall and started to push it to the side. It was surprisingly light. Once it was a few feet to the right, a small opening was revealed in the wall behind it. I couldn't see anything inside the darkened doorway, but I had to press forwards. I used my phone to light the way, and I found myself ascending a small set of stairs. Of course, the attic with the oval window. I tentatively clambered up the staircase, keeping my eyes and ears keenly peeled for anything untoward. When I reached the top, I stretched my hand towards the door handle before me, creaking. An icy breath skirted across my left ear. Something was standing on the step behind me. "They murdered him," a voice groaned. I didn't need to turn my head. I knew it was the mother. Quivering, I lightly pressed the standby button to switch off the screen. On the dark, glassy surface of my phone, I saw the walking corpse of the half-decayed mother, standing just behind me. Her gaunt face was illuminated by my torchlight. I screamed in terror, but I was quickly silenced by a gnarled, bony hand that clasped over my mouth. That only made me scream louder. I shook the creature off me, whirled around, and she was gone. Too frightened to spend another minute in this house of nightmares, I proceeded to repeatedly slam my shoulder into the attic door. Finally, it gave way. I cast my phone light into the attic, expecting to be met with emptiness, but I turned to the right to find myself looking upon 4 malnourished children who were shivering beneath the oval window. The world outside remained an endless void, but that was besides the point. I'd done it. I'd found the girl who had been trapping me in the loop for thousands of years. It hadn't been a fruitless endeavour. The children were crying incessantly. "I'm so sorry," Pippa said. "I was just so scared. Can you help us to leave this place?" "We didn't mean to do it," one of the boys whimpered. The voices made us lock her in here, another boy added. The third boy simply nodded, seemingly too traumatized to speak. Okay, I eventually managed to say. Do any of you know something that could help us to escape? Their eyes widened. You don't know how to free us? One of the boys shakily asked. I didn't respond. My mind was whirring. I thought about everything Harold had told me. Then I realized I didn't need his help. I needed the help of the people who had created the shrine. Sarah, I screamed. Jonathan! What are you doing? Pippa asked, horrified. We need to get away from them. Before I could reply, the wall at the far end of the attic started to ripple. Like swimmers coming to the surface of a pool, the dreadful mother and father seeped through the torn wallpaper. The children screeched, but I stood my ground, keeping the torchlight on the horrible abominations that were striding towards us. Is your son buried in the front garden? I asked. No reply. The emotionless demons looked upon me with awful eyes. If you create a bridge back to the real world, I could return him to you, I said. That's what you want, isn't it? The mother started to walk towards me, and I trembled in immobilizing terror. He should be here with us, she wheezed. Open the bridge, I repeated. You can't leave the house, can you? I can return his bones to you. I can give you peace. But you must return all of us to our rightful places, on our rightful timelines. The ghouls stared for a long time. The only sound in that haunted room was the blubbering of the 4 children who were hiding behind me. I received my answer in the form of light pouring into the room. Not light from my phone, light from the oval window. I and the children turned to face the real world. Fireworks filled the sky. As we watched with teary eyes, the children dissipated. The outside world, in turn, rapidly changed. The sun rose and set thousands of times in the matter of seconds. Years were passing. When the earth eventually slowed, I knew it was 2022 again. Return our son, the father wheezed. When I turned to face them, the terrifying entities were gone. I sprinted down the stairs from the attic, bounded across Bert's bedroom, flung my panicked body along the hallway and started to sprint down the main staircase. Gliding across the hallway towards the open door, I prepared to taste freedom. Scorching agony. Horrified, I found myself engulfed in darkness, before being thrown onto the floor of the hallway. I bellowed in pain, feeling a searing sensation across my skin. No, I whined in horror. The glassy-eyed man. He was standing on the front porch, obstructing what seemed to be the only exit from this house of hellish tricks. He was little more than a shadow, filling the doorway with his black form and white pinpricks. I fixed it, I yelled. The loop is over. No response from the inhuman entity. No movement. I checked the time on my phone. 11:02 p.m. It's after 11 o'clock and I've not reset, I explained exasperatedly. The loop is over. After an eternal moment, the shadow faded into the blackness. The glassy pinpricks merged with the night sky, joining a canopy of twinkling stars. My strained heart finally loosened. Gingerly, I attempted to leave the house. I took a step onto the porch. Nothing stopped me. I hurried into the front yard and tore at the grass with my bare hands. Dirt under my half-broken nails, I quickly dug my way to the cluster of bones that the Hawthorne parents had buried. Why did they not keep the bones in the house? Did they ever manage to resurrect their son? Why were their souls trapped in the 11 shrine with their son's murderers? So many unanswered questions. I delicately and respectfully placed the pile of bones inside the main hallway, quickly exiting the Hawthorne house. As I tiptoed backwards, keeping my eye on the open front door, I saw a bony hand stretch across the wooden floor and drag Bert's remnants out of view. As I passed through the gate, the door to the Hawthorne house swung shut. That was 15 minutes ago, and I hope, beyond all hope, to never reopen that terrible chapter of my life. At this very moment, I find myself sitting on the curb, typing my update and staring vacantly at swarms of partygoers. They're blissfully unaware of the horrors lurking in the abhorrent building just behind me. 11:20 p.m. I've never lived beyond 11 p.m. on December 31st, 2022. That must be a promising sign. I'm free, surely. At 11 p.m. I didn't wake up in 1999. Pippa must have released me. But has the Hawthorne House released me? Has the glassy-eyed man released me? I suppose I'll never have a definite answer. I'll always wince in terror at the sight of cavernous crevices. I'll always look for those white eyes. I cannot conquer the unknown, but that's not my battle. After thousands of torturous years, I would simply settle for seeing January 1st, 2023. At midnight, let's hope I managed to post a comment. I can't believe it. 2023. I scurried home and tightly embraced each of my family members. I wanted to kiss you. It's 2 minutes past midnight, my wife said, scowling. It took you a long time to get here. She has no idea.